Welcome to the Housing and Services for People with Disabilities training. My name is Jerry Mellum. I'm a senior planning analyst. I work in a lot of areas, including housing. If you have questions, because this training has a lot of detail and important information in it, please feel free to email or call me. My email address and phone number are at the end of the training. Email works better for me, but that's up to you. What works better for you? We hope you get the information you need and enjoy the training. We'll be updating it periodically with new information. We would like you to consider not forwarding this training directly to others for risk of getting outdated information. Each training is updated with the most current information at the time. We will update it ongoing. This one is labeled May 2020. For the best results, you want to register online at the community info sessions email address listed here or call 612-596-6631 with your name, phone number, and email address so we can reach out and contact you. Today, we'd like to learn about the options for housing and supports for people with disabilities, understand how housing can be more individualized, learn how various housing options and examples, learn the various housing options and examples available, learn about funding streams and for ways to pay for food and rent, learn about funding for staff supports needed and natural supports to help the person as well, learn the importance of person-centered thinking and planning. Housing is evolving. The way housing was provided years ago is much different than how it's provided now. Years ago, people lived in regional treatment centers with large groups of people. Then there was a movement to smaller group homes owned by the provider who selected the staff and the roommates. And there's further evolution to my own home currently where people can live in a place they select and choose their own roommate and choose their provider or choose if they have a roommate or not, hold a lease, and rent an apartment or own a house. Earlier, the driving forces were looking at creative expansion on alternatives that were available. A multi-county group had been meeting and still meets, but had met for over 7 years to talk about best practices that they had experienced with each other and to develop ideas and talk to the Department of Human Services of how to implement services in the best manner. The Jensen settlement in Minnesota was an idea that compelled us to look at things in a more individualized manner, as well as the Olmsted Plan, indicating that people can live and work with people with and without disabilities in environments they choose to live with. Probably 7 or 8 years ago or more, there was this moratorium and continues on corporate foster care. And that moratorium said that we couldn't keep doing what we were doing before, building corporate group homes, community residential settings. We had to look at some other options as well. So we had to be creative. Group residential reform or housing support evolved. It included some of the individual's work income as well as the Social Security income in the formula versus not including any work income in the formula. And the Minnesota transition plan is continuing. Part of the progress in moving ahead is reframing the way we're thinking. Counties and providers of services are encouraged to be very creative and innovative to support the person with a disability. Separating housing from the support services is another option to help us be more creative. We have the ability to carefully consider non-licensed living arrangements for 2 people or less in the community. We're discovering new ways to meet health, safety, and well-being and risk factors a person may be experiencing, new and creative ways. We have opportunity and choice for individualized housing options in my own home, regardless of the level of need for the person. People that have significant need, people that have minimal need can be all served in the community in a flexible option. Matching services and supports to the person and where they choose to live. A person can live anywhere they want to within the resources they have, and matching the supports in place as well. We look at developing housing one person at a time versus planning for a large group of people. We look at the individual, what's important to them, what's important for them. We talk about interdependence versus just independence. Interdependence refers to ways I support my neighbor and my neighbor supports me, or I support my family and my family supports me, versus considering independence where I'm going to do everything by myself. Not many of us are absolutely independent. The idea that we don't have to be ready to move to a different setting because we can put supports and services in place. We don't have to know how to make macaroni and cheese. We can learn how to make macaroni and cheese later, but the supports and services are in place for us. The federal government holds a position that the most integrated setting is one that enables people with disabilities to interact with people without disabilities to the furthest extent possible with opportunities to live, work, and receive services in the greater community like people without disabilities. The Olmsted Plan talks about confinement in an institution severely diminishes the everyday life activities of individuals, including family relations, social contacts, work options, economic independence, education advancement, and cultural achievement. The Minnesota State Olmsted Plan focuses on housing as well, looking at communicating to the broader public the most flexible creative options so people can live and work where they would like to live and work, as well as other areas in transportation, supports and services, learning, healthcare, and community engagement. There are an array of housing options. We want to start off by giving you the bigger picture of what housing options might be available, including housing that might be licensed, other provider-controlled housing options and examples, and participant-controlled housing or my own home. Licensed services. Licensed services examples would be nursing homes, intermediate care facilities for people with developmental disabilities, which provide 24-hour care, active treatment. People have access to a dietitian and a nurse. Community residential settings, which are more commonly referred to as waiver group homes, are settings for 3 people or more in the community, generally not more than 4. Family foster care and corporate foster care are options as well that are licensed and paid for with funding specific to that service. Family foster care is a person or a couple sharing their home with a person, providing the food and basic needs for them. Corporate foster care is more shift staff that come in and provide supports and services. Other provider-controlled housing. As Minnesota continues on their journey to look at housing options and look at support services, some providers are or have been developing other provider-controlled housing options. Some of these examples are called hybrids, examples where the home is owned by the provider, but it's not licensed, or the program's evolving to meet updated requirements, but they haven't quite evolved yet. Examples would be the provider holds the lease for the folks living in that home or that apartment. The expectation that is in the future, the person or their legal representative would hold the lease versus the provider. Apartment programs with supports or share a home program where the waivered services combines with foster care. Participant controlled housing or my own home as the Department of Human Services has most recently defined it. Participant controlled housing or my own home is not a program, it's not an open bed or placement, it's not a model, it's not a development, it's not independent. It's currently two people or less, but it's defined as one person and up to two people, where people own the property, they own the home, or they have a lease in their name. The individual is, the supports for the individual have been developed for them. It's an individualized situation. It's when people choose their provider. It's where they have the right supports added at the right time. So people choose to have a roommate or not. They can choose to have a roommate or not. They choose their provider. They also have to decide who's going to do the individual tasks that need to be done. Who might pick up the medication? Who might mow the lawn? Who's going to cook the meals? Who's going to shop for groceries? Because it's not automatic in my own home situation because the provider is delegated certain tasks. The guardian case manager is also delegated certain tasks for success. The expectations in housing came from the federal government. These are normal, common expectations we aren't surprised at, but they haven't always been available or in writing for people. Expectations that people have their own lease or own their home, that people have their own living, sleeping, and bathing areas, that people have privacy in their living and sleeping areas. People choose if they want to have a roommate or not, that where they live has a lock on it and they have a key and they can get out if they need to. That people can decorate and furnish their areas to their choosing. The person controls their own schedule and activities. The person has access to their own food and kitchen. The person can have visitors at any time. The person is free to choose their service provider without risk of losing housing and to choose not to receive services. And that where they're living isn't a part of a larger inpatient treatment facility or located very near a large similar program. There are person-centered changes. In a system-centered focus, we talk about beds, filling slots, placements, closure. Um, we plan for a lifetime of programs. We focus on large groups of people and serving larger groups of people. In a person-centered focus or lens, we look at crafting a desirable lifestyle, designing an unlimited number of desirable life experiences, design an unlimited number of desirable options, creating a home for the person, finding new possibilities for each person, focusing on quality of life and emphasizing dreams, desires, and meaningful activities. This is all with a balance between what's important to the person, what's important for the person. Generally, people aren't healthy if they have everything that's important to them and nothing that's important for them, or everything that's important for them and nothing that's important to them. When I meet with families individually and I do trainings, I often use the following three questions. I found them very helpful because they cut to the chase, they break down the information, they help us to focus. The three questions are: where do you want to live? How will you afford the staff support necessary or the natural supports necessary? How will you afford rent and food? The rest of the presentation focuses on these three areas. Where do you want to live? There are potentially unlimited possibilities within the resources the person has to live. I often joke that I want to live in downtown Minneapolis on the 40th floor of a spanning condominium with a large balcony, but I'm in New Hope in a nice two-bedroom with a garage. So my desires are limited based on my resources as well, but I have lots of choices within the range of resources I have. Certain people I've heard of have a mother's-in-law apartment. They might have a duplex. They might have a fourplex with scattered apartments where people with disabilities are living in one of the fourplexes and people without disabilities or the community might be living in the other three. I've heard of a situation where a person modified a garage and created a one-bedroom apartment, and it was 7 feet away from the brother, so there was some natural supports there, and the one-bedroom apartment turned out to be really, really nice. You could rent an apartment, you could own a home or a condominium. There is first-time home buyer money available. There are land trusts and other options available. There's also options to live in a community residential setting or a group home, an intermediate care facility, a nursing home, as we discussed before. Housinglink.org. Housinglink.org is a great website that can sort your preferences for the amount of rent you want to pay, the number of bedrooms you have, if you want a washer and dryer, if you're looking for subsidized or income-based housing or competitive rate housing, it will sort those. And you can go back to these um, sortings you've had over and over again as you look for housing. How will I afford the staff support necessary? How will I find the natural supports that I need to support myself in a home? Can think about natural supports. Often I tell people about the folks that I volunteer with. One person lived in an apartment and there were chairs in a center courtyard where the men in that courtyard often gathered at night to talk and chat and just talk about the day. I noticed the other one day that the person I was supporting, his chair was there. And I was really happy to see that because he was being kind of becoming part of this natural support. And he had chosen to put his chair in the circle as well. He is a person that is a black belt in karate. And so his natural supports developed quickly. He was able to teach some of the guys in the apartment complex different moves. And when he needed something, they volunteered to help him. And when they needed to learn something about karate, he volunteered to help them. So lots of these natural supports can develop. Paid supports might be personal care attendant services. Knowing about all the county services that might be available, one is called Consumer Support Grant, which is a portion of the personal care attendant, the state share of PCA money, and it's used flexibly in a consumer-directed manner. Armed services, paid through medical assistance, rehabilitative mental health services, and waiver services, and the number of different waiver services. We also have trainings that are specific to the developmental disabilities waiver and all the services they offer, and the long-term care waivers as well. Services include personal support, night supervision, 24-hour emergency assistance, electronic monitoring options, remote monitoring, independent living skills services, home delivered meals, caregiver living expenses, and homemaker and more. Caregiver live-in expenses. The metro counties, Henry County, Ramsey County, Dakota County, Anoka County, the metro counties use a similar format for a roommate profile, a way to find roommates. It's actually a college roommate profile. It doesn't focus on people with disabilities. The idea is to put information in the description that reflects people's desires and find a match and then talk about additional accommodations needed for disability. Housing Benefits 101 is a very excellent website. The content in Housing Benefits 101 was contributed through the multi-county collaborative housing group. It includes definitions of housing, programs and services. It has an area called My Vault, where you can put your personal financial information about Social Security, and you can send it to trusted people you want to have a conversation with when you talk about budgeting. There's a glossary of terms, and there's a partner section. The partner section is very important because the partner section includes historic trainings that the Department of Human Services has offered. They're housed. If you click on partners, it'll come up to this page, which has a history of trainings they've offered in the past, including funding streams, how do I expunge my record, what if I have an unlawful detainer, all kinds of really helpful information is on housingbenefits101.org about programs and services to support people with disabilities. Examples of counties that have used to find roommates. Since my own home, previously described as individualized housing options developed, counties weren't in the business of finding roommates for people because the provider found roommates for people because they owned the home, they found the roommates, they did the shopping. But since then, my own home was introduced. There's a lot of flexibility in the ways people can put their housing together. And so counties have been creative. They've developed that roommate profile, which I showed you. They've had bowling for roommates. They've had guys' night out, girls' night out. They've had something called Munch and Move. They've had meet and greets. And they found that people might need to do this many times, or they might go to the bowling event, but they just check to see who's there for a few minutes and then they take off because they don't see anybody interesting. The person could also check with their family and friends, their church, their community center, their school, their day program, their vocational options, etc. One of the counties developed a landlord luncheon for landlords to help them understand how people with disabilities rent or income is more stable because they have ongoing supports on a monthly basis. One of the creative options is offered through Bridging Housing in St. Paul. It's called Rumi, R-U-M-I. The website is meetmyrumi.com. The tagline is what you seek may be seeking you. They try to pair roommates, often people with disabilities, with people without disabilities, and they work with people individually. They have individual interviews with each people they have to work with, and they follow up. They've been very successful. They put some of their advertisements on buses. I actually had a phone call from a person in Illinois that said, I hear Minnesota is doing some really creative things. I'd like to talk to you about that. And one of the things she mentioned was that she had seen an advertisement on a bus in Minneapolis regarding the roomie program. Thinking differently about supervision and alone time, like I mentioned, there's natural supports. The friend that I provided support for found some natural supports by meeting some of the gentlemen in his apartment program. When he moved to another program, when he moved to another apartment, he developed more friends there because he likes animals like cats and pets, and a neighbor had some cats, and they got along really, really well. And so that neighbor brought ice cream to a birthday party, and I was able to ask her if I needed something, if I could give her a call, since she was just down the hallway from him, and I was like a half an hour away, and she said, sure, that'd be fine. So these natural relationships develop over time. Think about what supervision really means. Does it vary by tasks? How long can somebody be left alone? How can that alone time be structured? What can technology do? Are there a list of technology options? There's a Tech for Home grant. Location. So when I'm volunteering with people, I'll often looking for people that are close to my home so I can be available to them versus someone who's across town and far away. So we look at different natural supports. How do we move from less paid reliance on staff to more natural supports? Thinking about different ways to provide supervision. Some of the supports and services that are available through different funding, often the waiver is common, or personal care tenant services. You have supported living services, housing access coordination, 24-hour emergency assistance, home delivered meals that can be one meal a day up to 7 days a week, personal support or companion services, remote technology and monitoring technology, private duty nursing, behavioral supports and specialists, consumer training and natural and informed supports. Again, there is additional training available through the developmental disabilities waiver and through the long-term care waiver that we can talk about more specifically what these different services. Natural supports, different ways to manage money, applying for energy assistance programs, preparing food budgets and menus, applying for assistance from food shelves, or locating the nearest Fair for All or Fair Share program, working together to ensure quality of care and review provider issues, scheduling, coordinating medical, dental, and other appointments, and cash assistance because expenses are uneven in situations where you control your own home versus a group home situation where the provider controls or pays for the expenses. Where do you want to live? HousingLink.org is a great resource that lists housing availability by location, by amount of rent you want to pay, by their accessibility. They list if they're income-based or not. They list public housing options as well and list a number of phone numbers to call. We'll get into public housing options in a little bit. Often public housing has a waiting list, and it's not that often that the waiting list opens, but when it does open, you want to make sure to apply. Some of the listings here give you an idea of what you'll see. One-bedroom apartment, what the deposit is, if there's an application fee, if there's background checks, if there's a minimum age, those kinds of things. How will I afford rent and food? There's a lot of information on how to afford rent and food. Your income often is a person's Social Security money or their retirement survival disability insurance. They might be employed, so that contributes additional to their money. There are programs and services available we're going to talk about called Minnesota Supplemental Aid or MSA and MSA Housing Assistance. There are housing support funds. Fair for All is a discounted food program that's more of a collaborative. You pay around $14 for $40 worth of fresh fruits, vegetables, and meat. There's free phone available through a number of government-sponsored programs. I listed one here. There's several others as well. Energy assistance options to decrease the amount of money you'll have to pay for heat in the winter. Waivered funds home delivered meals don't pay you, but you can have a meal per day up to 7 days a week if you have limits in cooking and grocery shopping ability, and that would defer the cost of having a meal per day. Caregiver living expenses, I mentioned that earlier. It's a service where the waiver will pay the caregiver's rent and food, and in addition, they pay them for the hours they're providing care and assistance, and that could be help displace maybe some of the costs. You could live in a two-bedroom apartment versus a one-bedroom apartment. Having a roommate, of course, displace some costs. You can afford more if you share the resources. There's other programs we're going to be talking about regarding Section 8, Section 811, and Section 42 programs. Market rate housing. Market rate housing is typical housing that a typical person would be paying for an apartment, buying a house, etc. It's an option for people with disabilities to buy a home. If you want more information about that, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Hennepin County had a demonstration years ago, so we're very familiar with the process of home ownership and helping to support people to buy a home. Rental housing, obviously apartments, rooms, or sharing housing with others. There are some site-based subsidized housing options based on income. Public housing can be scattered site in some areas. There's project-based Section 8, it's called, which is HUD funds, or Section 811 for people with disabilities, or Section 202 for elderly folks. Residents in these programs pay 30% of their income in rent. A friend of mine who has Section 8 pays around $220 a month for his rent because his income is, I don't know, higher than that. He's paying 1/3 of his income. State-based reduced rent housing, low-income housing that have tax credits, also called Section 42. Rent is less than the market rate, but can be more than 30% of the income. Residents must have income below certain standards, usually some percentage of the area median income, or AMI. Voucher-based subsidies, having a Section 8 voucher. It's funded by the federal government. The waiting lists for the Section 8 voucher are long and sometimes not open at all. The housing choice vouchers are portable, so the people that have them can use them in other areas. They could go outside of Minnesota to look at other housing in other states if needed. There's something called Bridges Rental Assistance Program. It's funded through the state of Minnesota. It's for people leaving institutional settings. Residents pay 30% of income for rent in most voucher-based subsidies. DHS has two significant assistance programs. Housing support, which was formerly called Group Residential Housing, or GRH, and Minnesota Supplemental Aid, as well as Minnesota Supplemental Aid Housing Assistance. To apply for housing support and Minnesota Supplemental Aid, you can apply online at apply.mn.dhs.mn.gov or use the Department of Human Services Combined Application Form, sometimes referred to a CAF form, which is DHS 5223. Check the cash box on page 1 and fill it out and sign and date it. In Hennepin County, I encourage people to go to one of the regional centers, regional county centers, if possible, for more individual attention to work with that process. Housing support, formerly called group residential housing, is typically used for licensed settings like group homes. It pays for room and board cost in a licensed or registered setting, adult foster care, board and lodge facilities, boarding care homes, housing with services, or rent and utility expenses in supportive housing for people who have experienced long-term homelessness, and sometimes supportive services for people in certain settings who have not received waivered or other services. Eligibility for housing support. Eligibility for Social Security or general assistance. You must be eligible for Social Security or general assistance and have income below certain limits and assets below certain limits. The Social Security basis of eligibility is $2,000 or less. The general assistance basis for eligibility is now $10,000 or less. Here's how it works. Remember, um, housing support is typically in a licensed setting like a group home. People pay their countable income. So whatever income they have that's countable, they pay that. And the state pays the rest up to $922 per month. Pretty simple formula if you think of glass. They fill the glass up to $922. If you have a lot of income or more income, the state fills less. If you have limited or no income, the state fills more. Housing support group setting with a person with no income. The person has no income in this example. The Minnesota Department of Human Services actually gives them $104 in personal needs money, even though they don't have an income. They pay the provider $922 for room and board. They expect the provider to provide 3 meals a day, beds and linens, laundry, housekeeping, lavatory supplies, maintenance, and operation of the buildings and the grounds within that amount. Housing support group setting for a person with Social Security income. Their Social Security might be $783 a month, which is typically the maximum amount available. The Department of Human Services would then pay $243 of housing support money for room and board. The person keeps $104 of the personal needs money. $679 is countable as income for the housing support provider, and that totals to $922. Again, the Department of Human Services expects that provider to provide the same things, 3 meals a day, beds and linens, laundry, housekeeping, lavatory supplies, maintenance, and operation of buildings and grounds or their overhead. What's countable income? Countable income from work or benefits is what remains after certain deductions. For housing support, deductions include a 104 personal needs allowance. It's common that people living in a licensed setting being paid through housing support get $103 at the end of the month for their personal needs allowance. Sometimes that's seen as a disincentive because if you lived in a non-licensed setting, you would be able to have all the money left over at the end of the month. For earned income, we disregard the first $65 and half of the remainder. An example would be if they earned $500, they would reduce it by $65 and divide the remaining by 2. So they would have $217.50 countable income. The Disabilities Benefits 101 website, which is located at www.mndb101.org, helps to give you a more concrete example of how your income would reflect benefits that you would also be eligible for. You can look at the estimators and estimate your personal situation and have a visual of what your situation would look like. Minnesota Supplemental Aid. Minnesota Supplemental Aid, or MSA, is very commonly underutilized in the state of Minnesota. It's different than housing support. It's a monthly cash supplement to Social Security. To qualify for MSA, the person must be 18 years old, unless they're blind, and receive Social Security or would receive Social Security, but because of their excess income, they are not. Minnesota Supplemental Aid Benefits. If you had Social Security of 771, which is typical maximum, you could get additional $81, so you'd have $852 total income. Additional MSA special needs benefits can include representative payee fees of $25 a month, guardianship conservative fees up to $100 a month, and special diets if prescribed by the doctor. and this amount varies. MSA housing assistance. MSA housing assistance is a very exciting um, supplement available to people living in their own home. To qualify for MSA housing assistance, you must be eligible for MSA. You must be under age 65 when applying, and you have a monthly housing cost, rent, and utilities more than 40% of the gross monthly income. That's pretty easy. So if your income was $700, $750 a month, if your rent was $300, you also have to qualify for one of the following: relocating from an institution like a hospital, nursing home, regional treatment, inpatient center, or intermediate care facility for people with developmental disabilities, or intensive residential mental health treatment program, or be eligible for PCA services. So you've had to had an assessment for PCA. You don't necessarily need to be using it, but you have to be eligible for PCA services. An example for MSA housing assistance: if you had $783 of Social Security money, you would get $81 more through Minnesota supplemental aid, and currently you would get $192 of Minnesota supplemental aid housing assistance for a total of $1,056 total income. You'll be eligible for SNAP benefits, but they might decrease. For July 2020, the MSA housing assistance will increase to $392, or half of the person's Social Security benefit amount. So that's pretty significant. So it'll go from $192 to $392. Examples on how MSA housing assistance is used: if the person had $793 in Social Security and they met the criteria to qualify for the program, they would get $81 in cash from MSA and $192 from MSA housing assistance for a total of $1,056. They would make decisions on where to live, how much they spend on housing expenses, and how to spend any remaining income. Crisis housing funds. This is short-term assistance, rent or mortgage for people with serious mental health issues, mental illness, whose income is being used to pay for inpatient psychiatric treatment of 90 days or less. Goal is to retain the person's housing. So if the person is in a hospital receiving inpatient psychiatric treatment for 90 days or less, this service would pay for that person's rent in their apartment until they can return home up to 90 days. ABLE accounts are relatively new in Minnesota. An ABLE account stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. It allows people who become blind or disabled before age 26 to save money to pay for many different disability-related expenses, including housing. The maximum annual contribution is $15,000, and the balances can be accrued up to $100,000, are excluded from the Social Security income limit. If you enter www.savewithable.com/Minnesota/home, you'll get more information. There are also rent voucher programs that we mentioned earlier, housing choice vouchers, bridging grants, shelter plus grants, and local housing redevelopment authority or community development agency money available. Some tools to manage your money. I can include these tools in an email attachment. This is a basic way to look at your budget. The questions are this similar: where do you want to live? How will you afford rent and food? Do you want a roommate or not? This example is a little more comprehensive. It includes some things we often forget, like gifts or water bills, or garbage bills, or cable or internet, as well as give you an idea of how much money you have and what you're going to spend it on and what that will look like. Person-centered thinking is an important part of planning for housing. Person-centered thinking doesn't always have to be a formal process. When we think about what's important for the person, what's important to the person, is there a connection between what's important to and for, and is that addressed? What does the person want? Is there a good balance between what's important to and what's important for them? If yes, what needs to stay the same or be maintained or enhanced, and what needs to change? Think about person-centered thinking when you're planning. If you have a roommate that's a get up in the morning, go and jump and be a happy and bubbly person, and you are not a morning person, is that going to work out? Or the same way, if you are a person that stays awake till 2 in the morning and listens to rock music, and your roommate is more of a morning person, is that going to work out? How is your person-centered morning routine or evening routine going to fit with people that you're going to live with? Some resources, if you have the waiver, the CADI waiver, the DD waiver, the service can be paid for, the person-centered planning process can be paid for, the waiver through family counseling and training, or consumer training and education, or family training and education. You can look for person-centered planning providers on minnesotahelp.info. Sorry, minnesotahelp. I think it's info. Let me check that. The University of Minnesota Institute on Community Integration, and they will eventually be listed on the website. This is an example of Kevin, who did a one-page description. Kevin found his roommate because they both worked at Best Buy. Kevin had supported employment, and his roommate was employed at Best Buy, and they had a lot of things in common. They all both liked sports. They both liked to cook. One liked to clean more than the other. And by having a one-page description, it was helpful to find roommates or housemates, and it made it an easier process. In a one-page description, you want to include what's important to the person, how to best support the person, and what people like and admire about the person. When I did my first one-page description, I discovered a lot of things about myself that I didn't know. Generally, I'm a busy person. I have meetings all day long. It's hard to catch lunch during the day, so I'm often stopping at fast food places, and that's not the healthiest thing. So some suggestions I had to keep me healthy and safe were to remember to eat well, um, to go to the doctor once in a while, to exercise, in addition to work hard, to take time for myself, to travel when I can, to relax. And I discovered some things that are important to me and some other kinds of support. So a one-page description can be very helpful when you're looking for a housemate or a roommate. I'm very lucky. I've been able to work with Sam. Sam was a person that was living with his parents, and at the time his sister moved out and his brother got married, and he asked his parents, when am I going to get to move out? So his parents started on a journey of educating themselves about housing options and choices. They went to several trainings and completed some plans for Sam. And eventually they landed on a duplex that was within their neighborhood, not far from them. They looked at the situation. So Sam was a 21-year-old who asked his parents when he's going to move out. He's a person with Down syndrome. His challenges are having a safe support for his own apartment, because he's a person that appears very independent, but he has additional needs that aren't apparent. His verbal skills mask some of his vulnerability. So they were looking at finding a supportive living environment that wasn't controlling, that wasn't bossy, that wasn't a power over situation, but was more a peer living in a situation. So their desire was to find a housemate that would live with Sam, to be a peer and also to be near natural. His parents and Sam worked together to find this house, in South Minneapolis. It was a great location in between two relatives and the family's home. Sam got to be really busy with his activities and work and community involvement to the point that you had to call him to have an appointment to have a coffee or a talk with him. He was very busy. He worked at Carboni's Pizza. He had a girlfriend. He was in the intramural basketball team. He had a garden in his yard. He was a very, very busy, busy guy, and still is. This gives you an idea of his finances. He rented a two-bedroom apartment, a two-bedroom duplex. He had a live-in caregiver. He found a staff that was willing to be a peer and not be a manager, but to be a peer and live with him equally. The rent was $1,100. The food was about $400 for both. Sam's income was $783 through Social Security. He got $92 from Minnesota Supplemental Aid. His housing assistance, MSA housing assistance, was $194, and in July 2020, it's going up to $391.50. I stated earlier, he used caregiver living expenses. So caregiver living expenses paid for half the rent and food, or $800. So he didn't have to, he could live in a two-bedroom apartment, but he only had to pay for his share. He has the natural supports of his family and friends. And so together, his income was $1,009 total. He got $40 from his food support, and he had $309 remaining after. And so that's how he was able to afford a two-bedroom with a live-in caregiver. In some ways he saved money. He participated and applied for a free phone, a free smartphone. Through a program, he got 200 free minutes and unlimited text and discount. You could also get discounted internet costs if you decided to get the internet versus a free phone. Minnesota Energy Assistance Program, it deferred the cost of heat and utilities for the winter. He was able to apply for that, and based on his income, he got a grant. Fair for All is a program that provides food at a discounted amount. You pay $14 or around there. You get about $40 worth of fresh fruits, vegetables, and meats. And the waiver programs offered home delivered meals, one meal a day, 7 days a week. He has a homemaker to help him keep his place clean and help him do grocery shopping. And he had chore services to help him with heavy duty things like windows or carpet cleaning. And he had the natural supports of volunteers. Housing supports what's working. What's working is more people are living in their own home than ever before. Many choose where they live and work and who provides their services. There's a range of services tailored to individual needs that border, and there's broader discussions about options for people. There's less issues of having to fit into a program and less issues of finding an opening because you can develop your own program based on the needs of the person. You can also still look for an opening. Those options are still available through community residential settings. So all the options we have before are there, but there's some more. What's not working is there's a staff crisis. It's really hard to find great support staff. There's also a lack of affordable housing in the community, which limits people's choices. People with bad credit or a criminal background can be screened out of housing, and services still might be tied to housing. Some online sources available listed: Housing Link, MATSH, referred to transitional housing in the metro counties, Minnesota Sober Homes, Craigslist for roommates, Minnesota Housing Benefits 101, Lifestyle Inc. There's a task force, a multi-county individualized housing collaboration that has met for at least 8 years since the moratorium on corporate foster care They meet monthly. They discuss housing best practices. From the information they learn, they share with other counties so they can implement the best practices immediately. They were instrumental in contributing information to a booklet outlining my own home, and that information in the booklet was a key part of the information that's on the Housing Benefits 101 website currently. Earlier. My information is here, Jerry Mellum, Senior Planning Analyst. My phone number is 763-360-9307. Feel free to email me at jerry.mellum@hennepin.us if you have any questions or if I can consult with you.